When Germany surrendered in 1945, millions flooded the streets of London, New York, and Moscow to celebrate what felt like a permanent global peace. But the alliance that defeated Hitler was a marriage of convenience, and it began to fracture the moment the common enemy disappeared. While Washington pushed for democratic elections in liberated territories, Moscow demanded absolute control over Eastern Europe to ensure nobody could ever march into their country again. The two remaining global powers looked at the world through entirely different lenses. The United States sat wealthy, its homeland untouched by battle. The Soviet Union was traumatized and deeply paranoid, having just lost 27 million people to the war. Joseph Stalin moved to prevent future invasions by aggressively filling the power vacuum in Eastern Europe. He ignored calls for elections and installed communist puppet governments from Poland to Bulgaria, creating a massive buffer zone for the motherland. This sudden territorial grab drew an iron curtain straight across the continent, splitting the globe into two hostile, deeply incompatible realities. Harry Truman walked into early post-war negotiations with a capability no other leader possessed. He was barely 2 weeks into his presidency when he learned the United States had successfully built the atomic bomb, a weapon capable of leveling entire cities in seconds. That exclusivity barely lasted. Soviet spies quickly stole American nuclear research, allowing the USSR to build and detonate their own bomb. Almost overnight, the two nations plunged headfirst into a massive arms race, stockpiling enough firepower to level the planet. This created the central paradox of the next half-century. Two rival superpowers desperately wanted to defeat each other, but actually firing their best weapon guaranteed their own absolute destruction. This logic loop is mutually assured destruction, or MAD. A single launch triggers an immediate retaliatory launch, ensuring both nations end in radioactive rubble. To avoid direct fights, America developed containment, blocking communism from spreading while avoiding invasions of Soviet territory. Stalin decided to test this boundary right away. In 1948, he blockaded every road leading into West Berlin, attempting to force the democratic enclave to surrender by cutting off food, fuel, and medicine to 2 million people. Rather than smash through the blockade with tanks, American and British planes flew around the clock for nearly a year, delivering over 2 million tons of food and coal from the sky. This massive logistical effort sustained the city until Stalin finally lifted the blockade. Since traditional combat meant global annihilation, the conflict morphed into a battle of optics. Dropping chocolate bars from an airplane proved that public relations victories were now just as strategic as taking territory. This fear of ideological spread birthed domino theory. American politicians worried that if one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would topple right after it. To stop those dominoes from falling, both superpowers started pouring money and weapons into proxy wars around the world. The Korean War became the first major, bloody test of this theory. Millions died in 3 years of combat, proving that the Cold War could turn into an active shooting war as long as nuclear weapons stayed off the table. Even the space race was a disguised military competition. While the world watched satellites beam radio signals from orbit, military planners realized that a rocket capable of reaching space was a rocket capable of delivering nuclear payloads across the globe in minutes. The Soviets soon realized they were losing the public battle. The sudden construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 was an admission that they could no longer convince people to stay under their system. They had to physically trap people inside. Whether they were fighting through divided cities, outer space, or proxy armies, both superpowers were blindly escalating the tension. They kept blindly testing the absolute limits of each other's patience, pushing the entire planet dangerously toward a catastrophic breaking point. That breaking point arrived in 1962. The Soviet Union secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This drastically slashed American warning times down to a matter of minutes. The tension peaked deep underwater. An American naval blockade began dropping warning charges on a completely cut-off, overheating Soviet submarine. Inside that sweltering metal tube sat a nuclear torpedo, and a captain convinced that World War III had already started. Launching that torpedo required the unanimous agreement of 3 officers. The captain said yes. The political officer said yes. But the third man, Arkhipov, refused. Cut off from Moscow, he argued they didn't have enough information to start a war. Mutually assured destruction didn't save humanity through brilliant geopolitical strategy. The entire system survived strictly because of the sheer luck of one exhausted man refusing to push a button, exposing the doctrine for the suicidal gamble it actually was. The terror of the Cuban near miss forced a temporary relaxation of tensions, known as détente, but that calm shattered in the jungles of Vietnam, where a long proxy war proved American military dominance didn't guarantee victory against guerrilla tactics. By the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan decided to confront the Soviets directly. He sent defense spending skyrocketing and proposed a space defense system called Star Wars. While the United States threw massive wealth at new technology, the Soviet interior was rotting. Their economy had completely stagnated, and they had effectively bankrupted themselves fighting their own 10-year war in Afghanistan. Hoping to save the system, a new Soviet leader named Mikhail Gorbachev introduced policies of openness and restructuring. But introducing transparency into a highly controlled state accidentally acted as a self-destruct button. The American strategy of relentlessly outspending its rival finally broke the illusion of the Red Empire. The Soviet Union simply couldn't afford to play the game anymore. Once it became clear the Soviet economy was failing, Eastern European nations began declaring their independence. And unlike his predecessors, Gorbachev refused to send in tanks to crush the resistance. He simply let them go. The physical Iron Curtain collapsed in a wave of celebrations. In 1989, ordinary citizens flooded the checkpoints in East Germany and literally danced on top of the Berlin Wall before tearing it apart with hammers. The end of the Cold War was surprisingly swift. Republic after republic declared independence, old symbols were torn down, and by 1991, the Soviet Union quietly ceased to exist. The 45-year conflict that reshaped the world ended with the nuclear arsenals remaining in their silos. In an era that was defined entirely by civilization-ending stakes, the ultimate outcome was simply the peaceful survival of the human species.